This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again Dr. Buck Melton, whom many people imagine are going to be in Washington as our next vice president. Certainly a possibility.
Imagine is the right
Buck,
word, yes.
Are you really standing up to that stress and pressure?
Well, based on what Joe Biden says on the rare occasions that we hear about him and he's lucid, I think I'm probably the wrong sex and the wrong color. But he pretty clearly has said he wants a woman of color.
Libertarian candidate, possibly?
Philosophically, I probably come closer to the libertarians than anything else.
Well, it's a big decision
point.
I know you have to make about which party to cast your allegiance for, which party. It's going to be a big question in your mind, and I know we'll await an answer on that, Buck.
You'll be the first to know.
Okay,
I'll announce it here,
all right,
so.
Let's make is that a promise? You're going to make an announcement?
If I make an announcement,
that's good.
If I go with it, then this will be where I am.
I think that's an important national event. Well, having been on that horse for a bit and run around the studio, possibly we can discuss other issues, and one of them is the issue of free speech, riots, to use that word, government intervention or lack of intervention, and what does the Constitution have to say about that? Free speech, can you shout fire in a crowded building? What are the limits to free speech?
Well, it's like anything else. It's evolved over time, and sometimes it has changed direction rather sharply. You didn't get, frankly, a lot of free speech cases in American law, not a lot, until the early 20th century. And I think several things happened during that period to make free speech a bigger deal. We became a much more multicultural society than we'd ever been. Obviously, we're multicultural from the beginning, but the culture that dominated was WASP, wealthy Anglo-Saxon Protestant. But then once you get large-scale immigration from Central and Eastern Europe, the Industrial Revolution is underway. Society becomes much more interdependent. You have groups with a lot of serious bad blood between them. You saw new philosophies coming in from Central and Eastern Europe: collectivism, anarchism, syndicalism. The powers that be tried to tamp that down by putting certain limits on free speech. And then we get World War I, in which it was unpatriotic to be a German American because you were of the wrong ethnicity. It was really a terrible time. German language, something like 20, 30, 40%.
Liberty cabbage and sauerkraut.
Liberty cabbage, liberty steak. But you had German shepherds being killed. You had the German language being banned in public education. And this is when you have a sizable proportion of German Americans.
Yes.
It's really, and that's when you get the famous fire in a crowded theater, shouting fire falsely, I'd say, in a crowded theater.
That's a supreme. Maybe you could elaborate on that.
Yes, that's Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., and that's I believe the Schenck case.
Yes.
Which established the clear and present danger case, which has been modified, and a lot of that got modified during the Red Scare of the 1950s and 1960s.
I thought you were going to say 1920s, but no.
Well, there was another one.
There have been several, right?
Yes,
maybe one now.
There are two big ones. So. But as things stand right now, and a lot of this comes out of the tumultuous 60s, and some of us out there still remember the 60s, and I doubt anybody has really good memories of it.
Well, some occasional moments.
Sex, drugs, and nothing. All right. As matters stand right now, let's think about it. There is belief. There is what goes on in someone's mind.
Yes.
Then there is advocacy, or the expression of ideas. And then there is action.
Yes.
It's sort of a threefold point that clearly under the Constitution today, under the First Amendment, what you think in your own mind cannot be regulated. Although I would argue that the political correctness movement is trying to do just that, but that's not really official government policy. That's more of an ideology.
It's double think or Orwellian
Yes,
sort of
very
thought
Orwellian.
Control, or Jimmy Carter looking at the whatever
Yes.
sin in your mind, so you have to
Yes.
have pure thoughts.
Yes, but
Constantly.
that cannot be criminalized. On the other hand, many actions can be criminalized, because obviously an action or even a failure to act sometime can cause a social evil. It can be a danger to other members of the community.
Well, speech, I mean, in other words, is speech an action? Or
Well, no.
holding a sign up, is that an action?
This is where things get interesting, because it is the expression of an idea. It's nothing more than an expression of an idea, but that expression of an idea is often intended to try to bring about an action.
Is that fire in a crowded theater? I mean, is that expression? It's something that against the public welfare. If an idea is expressed and it can be said, well, it's true enough, it's an idea and you have the right to express it, but we judge it to be contrary to societal best interests.
And
therefore, you cannot express it.
Yes, and different people have different concept of what societal best interests will be. So the way that the Supreme Court has settled on this in the very famous case, but fairly brief case, of Brandenburg versus Ohio, in, I believe the year was 1969, the late 60s, or might have been 1970, but around that time. The Brandenburg case was actually a Ku Klux Klan case coming out of Ohio. A lot of people don't realize that the new Klan, the Klan formed in the early 20th century, actually had some very big membership in places like Indiana and Ohio.
Yes.
And so this was a Klan case, and the defendant Brandenburg was speaking at a Klan rally, and he was recorded. There was no doubt he said this, and he essentially said, "This is an organizers' meeting. We're not and this is pretty much a literal quotation. We are not a revengeant organization." He
Whatever
came up with that
means.
word. Yes.
Well, that's okay.
Yes. But if
Make
the
your own
police
word.
don't, but if people don't pay attention, if the government doesn't pay attention to the white race, it's possible that some revengeance might have to be taken. We are going to march on Washington, D.C. and St. Augustine, Florida. Why St. Augustine? I've never really
Well,
known.
they had the Hispanic
Yes,
foothold in Florida.
Yes, I think he said on July 4th we're going to march on Washington and St. Augustine. Thank
Maybe
you
the
very
weather
much.
was better there.
Yes.
Go to the
Yeah,
beach, possibly. Yes.
And he was arrested. He was arrested for counseling violence and counseling illegal activity.
Yes.
And the Supreme Court said no. It's got to be more than that. You've got to have several things. You've got to have not just advocating violence, but actually inciting immediate violence. And there has got to be a likelihood that such violence will, in fact, occur as a result of that.
Yes.
So that's currently where we stand. And a lot of times when I teach the Brandenburg case in class, and especially during the time when Obama was president,
Yes.
if one of the hypotheticals I gave is if Brandenburg is standing there giving this speech outside the White House, and then he says to a Black Lives Matter group,
Yes.
when Obama comes out of the White House, there he is, let's get him.
Yes.
Is there truly a chance for imminent lawless activity or
Yes.
violence? Well, there might be against Brandenburg, but
Yes.
certainly not against Obama.
Yes.
So you have to have that likelihood of imminent lawless action. There's got to be no time at all to go to the police to manage to get things calmed down. At that point, the government can step in and stop the speech.
Well, obviously, we have all the tension in our country now. We have the riots, in which the idea is if we're exercising free speech, and certainly you could say, well, at least the suspicion is there that violence is being advocated and indeed violence has occurred. Frequently, police presence, quote, provokes it. And so just to go through this, it seems to be a pretty porous explanation the courts have come up with. In other words, there's so much subjectivity in the situation. It just depends on almost judicial whims, I might say that. As many things might be said about the court system in many ways, but I won't go there. I may have gone there in the past, but I'll abstain for now. The takeaway message is it's a really kind of a tricky situation we have. If thousands of people are marching, presumably in the marching the violence is occurring and there's property destruction, and the two are going together like a horse and carriage, a free speech demonstration, and then out of that arising violence. Many people might be in the demonstration just exercising the right for free speech, saying whatever, we don't want any more, we want to diminish the power of the police, we'd like the police to be diminished, we'd like protection for Afro-American citizens to be enhanced. Those all sound like free speech concepts. But when is the line crossed? And if the line is crossed, what is the what kind of criminal code, what's the criminal code say about it? What can the state do or other people do to say, okay, this is they're now calling for fire in a crowded building, thus they need to be restrained from exercising their privileges, and they need to be punished for doing this. And then how would that work out? And that seems to be an issue of consequence now, as there are so many street demonstrations that are happening.
Well, once again, I mean, there's several things implicated here. And once again, the fire in a crowded theater, and I think you have to correct your statement, they're not calling for fire in a crowded theater, it's shouting fire. If I say I'm going to...
They don't want to ignite the theater.
I hold dynamite and I'm about to throw it.
Well, thank you for that, that's right, I agree with that.
Right,
but now, would they say fire in a crowded theater if there were a fire? Was that the right...
Well, if there's a crowded theater and there is in fact a fire, and I shout fire, I'm perfectly
But maybe that's not the correct thing. Maybe that causes panic.
And on top of that, once again, shouting fire in a crowded theater has been modified by the Brandenburg case.
Yes.
That for better or for worse, remember that the First Amendment is not designed to protect popular expressions of opinion. Popular expressions of opinion do not need protection. If I get up and I scream free ice cream for everybody, nobody's going to try to shoot me or get me for that or censor me for that. It's if I get up and say somebody ought to kill that person.
Well, is that, in other words, does the standard have to be so extreme? I mean, what we're getting into is one of the penalties for diversity, and I'm going to say this, the idea is assume a bottom of righteous behavior is a very diverse place. It also means there are many, many groups of people that are in the country, they're all together, cheek and jowl, and it would be easy to offend someone. So the level of civility in speech and the codes being imposed are really, by necessity, becoming more and more intense. The limit of speech, what is unpopular, or it might be almost anything. I mean, because of the diversity of the country, almost any opinion stated is going to offend someone.
Yes.
I don't know if you really have many statements you can make that are totally without any kind of negativity attached. So I guess free ice cream might be one of them, or
yes. So are you advocate? Well, no.
I'm sort of
vegans would be very upset about that.
Yeah, that's right. What I'm trying to say is the idea is with free speech, if the standard in this crowded theater is, you can't say fire, almost any statement on any subject with a country that is so confrontationally diverse is going to find someone that takes offense to it, and thus could provoke some kind of counteractivity.
Yes.
I mean, almost anything is so almost any speech is dangerous.
Yes. Well, you're concatenating two or three different areas of thought. I mean, first of all, there's advocacy of violence. Let's go kill him now. You've all
Yes.
got your guns. I see you've got your guns. Let's go kill him.
Right.
That's advocacy of violence.
Yes.
And what I said is, if there really was a group in the studio and they were armed and there was somebody I was pointing at,
Yes.
that could be, the government could shut me down and arrest me for
Right,
that and
yes.
censor me for that. Another one would be fighting words. The Chaplinsky case in 1942, you have a Jehovah's Witness who's
Yes.
doing street preaching.
Right.
And a policeman comes up to him and says, "I'm sorry, you don't have a license to do this, a license to
Right,
speak
right.
on the
It
street."
sounds, I've heard that before.
Yeah. And the Jehovah's Witness says, "Get your hands off of me, you blankety blank fascist."
Right.
And so the fighting words exemption to free speech coverage is that there has to be speech that is utterly without any redeeming social value, and it's got to be calculated. It's not even the conveyance of any kind of useful information for the good of the community. It's just designed to get the other guy to throw a punch. And then what you start about talking about something might offend anyone, that's political correctness. And I can't believe you're buying into that.
No,
Because
I'm happy you hit the softball back. I've been throwing some softballs and you've swung at it.
But nobody's got a constitutional right not to be offended.
What I'm getting into is that basically the societal tensions are so extraordinary now. The standards of free speech in the past, where everyone's pretty tolerant, everything is pretty cool. You can just take your conversation wherever you want to take it, and oh, that's interesting. But if you have people, let's say, with baseball bats in the street, and a very volatile arrangement where there are just many angry people. It's hot. They're having they've got masks on, and they're different in the crowd. There are different kinds of insults that are in evidence. I mean, maybe not you particularly, but everyone in the crowd. There are thousands of people, and they're pushing against property. And maybe someone throws a firebomb, or maybe not. And in the middle of all this, a person is in the mob, to use that phrase, and the person that's caught up in this in the web may say, "Well, I was just an innocent spectator," but is the idea that putting the match to the gasoline was the quote exercising free speech? Just to go with this, the sense of anger, the fighting words that are being employed, the general tone of insults and anger and threats. The sense of threat is so powerful, and then finally, when an action takes place, that stops. You're totally out of the issue. You have no protection for the free speech argument. Is that where we're going over this?
Well,
in other words, if you actually throw a firebomb, or you destroy property, or you injure a policeman, or if you're a policeman and you do the same exact insulting words. So looking at what goes on there, I mean, the 1942 fascist story, this would be exactly the kind of argonaut that would be used every day. Well, so they're insulting the police. Is that enough to?
Well, not quite, because the facts you just gave me, you have a group of people there who are obviously armed. They got baseball bats and they've got rocks, and at that point, you're not talking speech. You're talking about. You're talking about actual
if you have a baseball
congregations.
bat and you confront someone and you're saying, "I feel it's part of my protection," and there's intimidation going on, and the person on the other side feels threatened, or maybe just an angry mass of people, which we get into the situation in St. Louis when the fellow was there with his armed, he had a gun, his wife.
And they've now been charged, by the way, if you know.
Right,
so.
but what they construed as a mob threatened them,
Yes.
and they did nothing. They just had it's another story, is that they didn't injure anyone. They just stood in front of their property, and there was no exchange of anything. But the message was that if you cross a line and then something's going to happen to you. So you could say free speech just with a gun on one side, that's okay or not okay, and then someone with a baseball bat on the other side, is it okay to have baseball bats and rocks?
Well, once again, the thing that they've actually been charged with is displaying weapons, and the word display almost sounds like speech. but they are holding there in their hands the potential for violence. I have not read the case, I'm not up with it, but I would be surprised if there weren't some serious challenges by their attorneys as to, I think that there was largely political motivation there.
Of course, let's call it what it was. Of course it was.
But let me flip this on you. Have you seen the video of the Navy veteran, the Annapolis grad, who is in Portland? Older man, he's been out of the service for a while, mid-50s, and there is a video of him walking up to riot police. He is clearly unarmed. He is holding his hands up. We don't know what he said, but he apparently said, why are you doing this? Remember your oath. He was obviously not being a threat.
Yes.
The policeman violently, with a baton, with his full arm, hit him several times in the leg and then tried to bring him down, and then another policeman sprayed him in the face with pepper spray.
All right, good. I think we're in the middle of the conversation. This is where the conversation needs to go. So we have these tremendous societal tensions that are out there.
And he's knotting them up. He's out by himself.
I understand. So the question is, it's an important question. So right now, in many cities, you could say Portland, or anywhere, Seattle, New York, maybe to some degree Atlanta, people say, well, you have free speech, so you can basically take over a public space. You can stay there. You can chant. You can sing songs. Maybe you can obstruct people from entering the area. And there's something like public nuisance. I mean, all these, there may be misdemeanors that are out there, but it's a pretty extreme expression of free speech, I would say, if you're actually occupying a space. And then the idea is that, and this is an issue of consequence, I think. So if the state is attempting to enforce some kind of order, and the rubric under which the disorder is occurring is that we're exercising free speech, and in the process of doing that, all sorts of disruptions happen, and there's threats against property, or at least the perception of threats exist. And then a relatively innocent person, and I'm sure there are many innocent people that are in the mob, which we could, I think we could probe that word a little bit. So we have a lot of people that are, quote, demonstrating, they're out there chanting, they're making noise, and the police or the societal forces are restraining them, or they're attempting to draw some kind of line. And then the provocation finally snaps and someone goes over the limit and does some kind of heinous event, say heinous thing. That seems to be the common story there, and how are we going to parse that out? I mean, there's the Navy veteran, this guy that's innocently did something, and then you can see all sorts of pictures of mob actions that have taken place, many, and probably more pictures actually. So in the middle of this almost war, you could say, that on both sides, bad things are going to happen. Probably, in my opinion, the most obvious bad actions are the people that are the demonstrators. I mean, the most obvious burning things, the injuries happening, it's mostly in their bailiwick, though the other side, the police have responded with great force sometimes.
Yes,
and we can talk about
and that's called breaking the law, what the police do.
But what about the other people? In other words, what is the boundary? If you have a responsibility to do something, it's your job to do this, and allegedly you have some kind of training about the appropriate thing to do. What happens when you enter a war situation, if I could say it that way? So it gets to be so provocative, the situation is so overwhelming that it is almost impossible to restrain people, particularly the people that you have, that are holding the baton. How do they get there? What's their job? What's their deal? Have they been compensated appropriately? How much of society's resources have been put over the years in having a great sense of restraint capabilities in the police force, and probably the amount of money that's gone in there into this societal structures, I think has been fairly nominal. Yes. So then you're asking this rather nominal institution to go over their head a lot, and then what do you do if if in fact the institution let's defund them. So one idea is out there is, well, this institution that I might say hasn't been appropriately funded to start with is going to be further defunded and further chastised. And the people that wear the blue and have the badge are going to be more and more marginalized. Doesn't it become, if you get down to the bottom line about what causes laws to be enforced, the will of the state, the assumption would be the powers of the state are pristine and pure, and thus whatever kind of the Bill of Rights can be protected by the forces of the state that are what can one say, moralistic, fine, without evil, and the requirements of that force become so excessive, the state cannot enforce, say, laws everyone would agree with, whatever. Let's say murder, for instance. We're going to stop murderers, but the state can't do it because they've been marginalized.
Well, I think we got to stop and take a breath.
Shall we?
There are 15 things to unpack
well,
here.
And
I think we got to go for an hour.
All right, let's make it an hour. All right, let's do that.
All right. The first thing, and then let me do this off the top of my head. Let's look at the forces involved here. On the one side, you have got the force of government power. And this government power at all levels is funded by literally hundreds of billions of dollars. They have the highest tech surveillance and crowd suppression and military equipment that have ever existed in the history of the world. And leaving aside questions of legal restraint for a minute, just in terms of technical capability, manpower capability, surveillance capability, no individual, not even a fairly sizable group of individuals can withstand that power. If they want you, they will get you. You and your entire family can be made to disappear at 2 o'clock in the morning. Even less advanced societies managed to bring that about very clearly. Hitler's Germany, the Soviet Union. And we feel this in this country. I mean, the writs of assistance, which is why we have the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, that this power, since it exists and since it is in the hand of fallible human beings, can be misused. And so, as Blackstone said, it's better that 100 guilty men go free than one innocent man be sent to jail. And that is the American bias. That's why we have these things. The criminal justice system is tremendously inefficient, but that's why we have it. Now, opposed to this is the fact that if 10 million Americans get together and decide, rightly or wrongly, that the deck is stacked, that the system is unjust, that the laws are the devices of the ruling cliques, then they can overthrow it, and they can overthrow it by violent and illegal means. So between these two systems, these two powers, these two potential forces, each of which can be misused, where do we come down? And final point, property, destruction of property. I think we've talked about a lot on this TV show.
Yes.
That ultimately, civil liberties, individual rights, and property rights are fungible. You have a certain number of heartbeats in your life, and you have used a lot of those heartbeats. You have translated or converted or transmuted those heartbeats into physical possessions. You turn your labor into money.
A little Lockean viewpoint there,
yeah,
but okay.
Exactly. And so in a way, it's like matter and energy. They're really two sides of the same coin. But the law has always said, at least in Anglo-American law, is that human life, human liberty is more important than property. So the destruction of a certain amount of property, you've just got to take it. I mean, the policeman cannot, you can't put a spring gun in your front door, and if somebody kicks in your front door simply to rob your home, you can't blow him away. That's an excessive use of force. Police, the same thing. That the police, they have to have an objective, reasonable belief that there is an imminent threat to life or safety before they themselves can turn to that violence.
Well, you know, I'm gonna withstand the temptation to jump into too many different ways in your conversation here, but the takeaway message is the power of the state, which you said, well, it's so extraordinary. I'm not sure it is that extraordinary, and you can maybe pick China might be a place to pick. You could pick other countries where the power of the state is pretty more omnipotent. And so I would say there are many limitations on the power of the state. And
I'm not talking legal limitations. I'd say there are no technical limitations. It's you against a federal.
It could. Well, all right.
system.
It's the individual against some kind of system.
Yeah.
If all right, I'll
The only
sort of
limits-
take that.
yeah, the only limits are legal.
So the question
Yeah.
is the violation of some kind of standards or laws, or who violates that, and the ability of the state to respond to that. So in general, the hand of the state has been crippled for many reasons, and appropriately so. So the power of the I don't think the power of the state is that overwhelming, or the use of it. The potentiality, the technical abilities to do something, okay, presumably a lot of the power of the state has been diminished, though the Chinese are showing what the state could do in sort of a 1984 kind of arrangement here, which says the whole 1984 situation may well be upon us. Okay, the state could have a lot of power, could do a lot of stuff. It doesn't do it. And we went through what the Bill of Rights does. We have free speech, parsing that out. And I sort of tried to make the case that in the social tenure of the country has gotten to the point that it's getting increasingly the rubric free speech is often being used as a cover for insurrection. So if the state is faced with insurrection, then the game changes. And so traditionally what happens, I think, in times of war, the idea of free speech or putting out contrary opinions becomes substantially diminished. And the big question to ask is, which we didn't quite get into, I've sort of been dangling that out there, the idea that who is going to say what is a acceptable opinion and what is not. And so what is going on right now is there's a new standard of exceptional opinions that are being put out there. And so the limitations of speech are not just merely being hit with a club, but it also means you lose your job, which is happening every day. Someone made a coarse joke or offended someone, or particularly you could say sexuality in free speech or whatever. Well, you look very good, Louise, in your tight sweater today. Well, that's free speech, but it has gone past some kind of line, or someone may make some kind of comment that may have a racial connection. It might even be an innocent one. You know, why are all the the great basketball players Afro-American or something like that? I don't know. It sounds bad to me to say that. But I mean, people could take offense with any kind of comment, and so really what we're having is an extraordinary decrease in free speech, mandated by the terrible social forces that are out there. And what is going on, and I think in many of the rioters out there, is the attempt to suppress speech. So what happens if you're exercising my free speech to suppress your free speech? And if you attempt to stop me from suppressing your speech, then I will say this is illegal. On the other hand, I can use all my moral force and my abilities to intimidate corporations and television networks by the threat of armed rebellion. So the threat of insurrection, the threat of street violence, the threat against property is in the hands of the mob. And many times the standards of civility and appropriate behavior become smashed in times of civil discord. And that may be what's going on at this point, and it's a really spooky kind of thing. If the state has we talked about the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the idea the courts are going to enforce fair play here. Are the courts enforcing fair play, let's say, when you're fired, let's say you're a big executive of some type, and you're fired for some exercise of free speech, an innocent comment, which is getting quite close to, you said, well, there's no thought control. What happens if that you're just spontaneously, you're at a bar, I don't know, whatever, you're loose and you're in some kind of arrangement where you feel like your thoughts can just flow out, and someone hears one of those thoughts, and then they take offense to that. In totalitarian nations, in totalitarian places where I've been, I mean, I'll say Syria is one of them. Don't say anything, people said, my Syrian friends, because we're just having dinner and talking and they're having a little wine. The bartenders are in the hands of the secret police here. That's a true story. Mm-hmm. And so if it's okay for you to say something, but if I'm lured into some kind of comment here, then I will be reported. And so how far is that type of suppression of free speech away in these present circumstances? So I'll now talk, I'm going to throw that out, and then I can't resist talking about human life and property, but that's my comment now. So on that, maybe I'll let you respond.
Well, and I am certainly not a supporter of political correctness, because once again, I think it is both a perversion and a subversion of the American way. And once again, the whole reason we have a First Amendment is the founders' realization that you don't want to use government power in this way, that there is no constitutional right not to be offended, and that if I had my way, if I could get myself and my minions elected, and then we could shut you down and prevent you from saying anything. That's not the way it's done, and the courts have been genuinely very hostile so far to what is called hate speech. There are hate crimes coming in. It's a creeping problem, but most of the political correctness, if you're talking pure speech, it's a social phenomenon. It's not a governmentally imposed phenomenon. I don't like it. I don't think it's healthy, but I think that's an entirely different problem from what we're facing now.
I think it's connected. I think it's very connected. And so, and you get into the idea that you started our little conversation by saying, well, nobody is going to interfere with your thoughts. I promise you, nobody is going to go there. You're not going to go into your head.
But you also know that I qualified that. I talked about the political correctness movement.
All right. Well, all right. Well, let's pursue that. But so I think it's no less serious to say it's social. I think it is a pervasive, extraordinary thing happening. It is an unbelievable thing happening, and in many ways, it's changing the whole complexion of our nation, and the sense of loyalty people have to the nation. So if you people, it's Superman in the American way. If the picture's standing there, the flag's in the background.
He renounced his American citizenship a few years ago.
Superman
renounced his American citizenship. This has been about 10 years.
Is he a Canadian the whole time, or what?
No, he just decided it's not right to be American.
I'm going back to Canada. What was this? What country did he?
I'm not sure he did it. I don't think he's a citizen of any country. He's a stateless person now.
Well, okay.
But my point is, I'm making your point for you, that political correctness has said that Superman, it's no longer right that Superman be an American.
Well, or us, as far as that goes.
Yes.
I mean, you have to say, what is going on here? If you have an opinion, you can express your opinion for one way or another. And obviously there are codes of politeness and kindness and gentility and restraint. But you really have got to have the ability to think what you want to think.
Well, let me ask you this. This is a social movement, and it is gaining ground. I don't like it. You don't like it. So let's say the political correctness movement manages not only to start winning massively at the polls, but they manage to bring about changes in the law, which the law does change over time. And so the judges start severely weakening the First Amendment. And now we do have thought crimes. We are in an Orwellian society, or in Fahrenheit 451. Would you be willing to take to the streets, if necessary, and arm yourself with a baseball bat to protest this oppression of your rights to speak out in ways that might not be acceptable?
Isn't that an interesting question? And let's see, people have the idea of going out in the street with a baseball bat. Well, I'd rather,
just for your own defense.
I believe I'd rather supervise, but I'm making a joke here.
Yeah, but just for your own defense. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think it would be an appropriate activity to do that. But
appropriate or inappropriate?
It would be appropriate.
Yes.
However, having said that, so armed rebellion, there is a time for armed rebellion. if the society becomes an insufferable one. But that's a terrible human problem. And so the wisdom of the political leaders, this requires enormous attention right now. And it's not an easy thing to do, to fly the ship right now. But having said that, okay. I mean, I'll just make a comment about street things. So traditionally, you would say people that have conservative opinions or elderly, they're in nursing homes or whatever. And the people that are they're 20 years old, the way their brain works is a more active kind of mentation. The idea of being out with a baseball bat is more attractive for a 20-year-old than a septuagenarian. And many of the septuagenarians, or octogenarians as far as that go, have opinions that are contrary to the general tenor of the times. But the people that are conducting the revolutionary movements, there's an age issue that's going on here. Mm-hmm. So it's almost a generational kind of thing. And in general, an older generation is less likely.
Never trust anyone over 30.
Well, they're less likely to try and change things by marching on the street, though it is not an impossibility.
Yes.
And in doing that, because it's such a what can one say about that? It would be such a cultural change to take those steps. It would be quite a task, but not an impossible one. It would have to be extreme circumstances, and presumably you do it in a more intelligent way.
But I hope you're getting my point here, that you seem to be having a bit of a problem with the people who are protesting now, protesting sometimes violently, but I don't hear you saying that you would never do that if you believe the circumstance is warranted.
Well, it's just my comment is that I would have a more, in other words, maybe the full, how does one resist a system that is contrary to, I guess, God's will or all the moral viewpoints you have? What do you do? And then what is the most appropriate way to resist that and change that? Mm-hmm. And it's a rather clumsy thing to do, to go in the street and to try and, that's in general.
Of course it's clumsy. It's destructive.
Right, and you can see how in many ways those opinions, if I can say this, it may be against their best interests. If the kind of world you want, the way that I'm going to obtain the world, that kind of world is I'm going to go out and just throw rocks and burn buildings. It has some kind of impact, but it also has a very contrary type of impact. So if you're attempting to stand up against a contrary viewpoint, I mean, there are different ways to do it. For instance, you could just be arrested. You could try the Gandhi kind of thing. All right, there are 3,000 people that were arrested just sitting down singing "We Shall Overcome." That's one matter. So that might be a more effective way to do it, as opposed to like firebombing things. And the nonviolent way often has a lot to recommend it, and this has certainly gone past that. So you could make a case, I'm going to martyr myself, like Bonhoeffer or someone. I'm going to this is such a terrible evil, I've elected to martyr myself. I'm going to allow you to crucify me. I'm giving my soul, and not my soul, I'm giving your body to be ground into chopped liver in order for this moral view.
Or the Buddhist monks in Vietnam in 62,
right. So that could be.
But sometimes it works. I mean, I'm not talking about whether or not it's legal. I'm not talking about whether it's right. I'm not talking about whether it's efficient or the best way to bring it about. But it sometimes does work. And remember what King once said, Martin Luther King Jr., a riot is the language of the unhurt. Rightly or wrongly, my guess is you don't go out and put yourself into that kind of danger unless you feel like the system is horribly, horribly biased against you and doing evil things to you and people.
Well, there are two statements about that. One, you have nothing left to lose, and the other one is you have nothing to do. Mm-hmm. So those I have nothing to do. Okay, well, and I also have nothing to lose. Well, there are many people. That's an attractive outlet for just emotional release, I guess you'd say. Mm-hmm. So many people that do that are in that situation. Additionally, if you look at the actually who are the rioters, it'd be interesting to see that. I mean, I don't think there's a real list of who was there and what their motivation was. Many people enjoy the sight of burning buildings, and many people are so estranged from society that's an attractive outlet. I mean, many former felons, there are many people in the crowd, many many righteous believers, and just a different group of people. And probably the violent people are a minority, but they're tainting the arrangement. Well, it's a pretty interesting thing. I'm going to now make one comment, which I think is an important one, and that is the relationship, maybe I've made the point before, I'll make it again, between property and human life. And so what's happened is the two have this crazy interconnection. And what's happened are people have made efforts to put a value on life and limb, and the value has become so inflated. And it's been inflated actually in the United States by the decisions made to it's a funny kind of thing, the decisions made to justify a green world or pollution. So the people say, well, I want to stop that factory. It's producing, I don't know, bad fumes, and it's causing lung disease, and so many people are going to die from this. And so if we close the factory, it's going to cost $1 billion, and I have to justify $1 billion worth of savings, so I'm going to put a value on human life to justify this. So the value has expanded up to there is a value on human life, and you could make it, basically it's about $10 million. $10 million. And so if you looked at the comparison of what everyone in the country is worth, the gross $10 million bucks, versus all the property that exists, what's happened is the value of human life, rightly or wrongly, is far, far, far past that of property alone, as the courts would declaim it. Mm-hmm. So we have a tremendous value that's so high that it's in other countries they have a much, I guess you'd say, lower value, and competing with those countries puts us at some kind of substantial disadvantage, which is one of the things to brood about, particularly in the relationship with China, which is rising power, how they can make their system work, albeit in an evil way, to go past ours by having a view that emphasizes property and power rather than human existence.
Yes.
I guess I said that.
Well, obviously we can in many different ways we can quantify the value of human life. We do it all the time. We do it in tort law, we do it in insurance.
Yes.
Yes. But is there not a point in the Judeo-Christian tradition, even the Abrahamic tradition, or really any of the world's great religious traditions, beyond which you cannot go? Beyond which you say that you cannot put a dollar value on a human life. And if you do that, then doesn't it follow that we become have a purely materialist philosophy, and people become nothing more than commodities? And I don't think we like where that goes. Which means the minute that your surgery calendar starts slacking off because you can't keep up the pace, it is more economically efficient for us to dispatch you and take your money and reallocate it to people who have more years and more productivity ahead of them.
I think they're doing that, aren't they? I mean, I'm making a little joke here.
THX 1138. I mean, this is where we're.
Well, I mean, the tax system sort of does that, but I mean, redistribution of wealth. And
to a degree, yes, but I'm just talking full out. You have not fulfilled your quota. Bam.
Yes.
Let's make no pretense about it. So.
Well, it's a complicated kind of story that we're really jumping around the different first base, second base, third base. Interesting story. We're sort of going point to point. But the issue with a leader, it's almost incumbent on a leader to understand the connection between property and humans, and really what you're talking about is the power a society produces. It generally expresses itself through, in some ways, through property, or the relationship between humans and property turns out to be an equation that maximizes human power, human potential. You could say in a society where that number turns out to be a low number, then the ability of the society to, if you want to say, act in a moral fashion or to fulfill our species' destiny becomes an impossibility. I mean, it just doesn't work. So, for instance, if you have a society where the human life is valued so much, I mean, a really extreme arrangement, then presumably it would make it impossible to do anything. So if you can't, humans are at risk for anything, and any activity they embark on has risk attached to it. So is the safest and best thing to do to lock people in their houses, kind of speak, so they wouldn't be injured, but where's the food going to come from? Well, somebody's got to produce the food, but in producing the food, there's risk, and so human life will be expended by the production of food. So there's, or energy or cold or anything. So there's a relationship between diminishing human life by activity, and then the production that needs to happen to preserve human life. So it's a bit of an equation, and leaders have to sort of parse that out.
Well, why are we leaving it to leaders? I mean, certainly in a pre-industrial society and in a market-based society, shouldn't the decision as to the amount of risk I should incur be mine? Okay, let me engage in a high-risk activity where I might be subject to a lot of infection and get slapped with a lot of malpractice suits. I know I'll be a surgeon. I don't like that. I want more security, and I'm willing to pay a premium for it in terms of how much earning capacity I've got. So I'll be what? I don't know.
About a university professor.
Well, there's a degree of that, although that's becoming
now that not so benign, is it?
Now that we're in an industrial society where killing capacity is so of any individual is so much greater, it's harder to make those calls. But maybe I'd say a network administrator.
So the reason I said leaders, but you could say to put the system in place where these choices are available. There needs to be some kind of overarching societal rule set that puts there as to how it works out. So the way those rules are put there, which are necessary, that has an ultimate impact on society. And so the point I was sort of making is that if you put such and I don't object to this, I mean that sounds acceptable, but there's a limit attached to it. If you say, well, I run a coal mine here, and we have to get the coal, and one miner in 3,000 will die every year. And if we don't do that, we won't have any coal. Or I fly airplanes. Airplane pilots, one airplane pilot is going to die every 10,000 times, something or someone. There's risk attached to this, and if in fact the compensation that takes place when the airline pilot dies just makes the airplanes impossible to put up there. You can't. The value of the person is so extraordinary that we can't have any airplanes. There's a limit to it, I guess, is what I'm trying to get into.
Well, I would say that's up to the airline corporation, and it's up to the investors,
but I would
it's
say,
up to the pilots.
Well, it's the rules society puts there. So if in fact, this $10 million that's been put there, if they could make it 50 or 100,
I'm not
the 10 million. To go back to this, what happened is that there is a number that's been propagated by the government as to what a life is worth. And I sort of tried to go through the way that's it, and it's in the interstices of government policy when they make decisions about climate, or as far as that, it's particularly relevant in new drugs and which drugs get produced. So there's a little equation people go through to say, well, if we do this, it's going to cost, I don't know, $100 million, and we'll save 10 lives. Therefore, it works. But if we only save 9 lives, we're not going to fund this. So by necessity, there are these numbers that exist. And now what I'm going to get into a little bit is when you're in conflict with another society that has lesser rules, then you often are at some, rightly or wrongly, are at some kind of disadvantage. So for instance, let's say in Vietnam, or let's say wherever you're fighting the Viet Cong, and to them, it's just the economic value of a life is much less. So they can expend 100,000 people to further their national ambitions. If we have 12 people that are killed, just the societal cost and is extraordinary for many reasons. And it's, any kind of conflict, that's an issue that's there, that's one of the issues that predicates many things. So, for instance, if you want tennis shoes, you want to produce tennis shoes, it's the value of whatever it is in another country is much less. So let's say you're producing tennis shoes, which is a story that is a germane one. It's a true story of our times. So Nike, big tennis shoe manufacturers, put their factories in low-income places where they could pay people less. But along with that, the protections that exist in those factories, the workers' compensation arrangements are extraordinarily less. Thus, it would be the high expense country would be where you couldn't produce any tennis shoes, and a lot of the national wealth. It's a complicated kind of story. The world's wealth is being redistributed because of the high value of life in Western countries versus a low value in other countries. And so that equation is something to brood about. And if it becomes excessive, there can be an issue for decision makers. So not that I advocate injuring anyone or doing anything, but at least it's something that ought to be considered rather than the absolute. So what I'm saying, the absolutist kind of view is that it's impossible for us to ever lose an airplane pilot. I mean, that's sort of an absolutist thing, because you can say to yourself, if the airplane pilots are flying and 2 of them are going to die next year in an airplane, therefore we're not going to have any more airplanes, if you take my point. So unfortunately, some kind of balance needs to be considered.
Well, of course, but the problem is, just listening to you over the last 5 minutes, I can't tell whether you're a libertarian or a collectivist. On the one hand, I get the feeling that you're saying that the government handles everything in America and you can't move without the government say so. And while we're certainly moving more in that direction, we're not there yet. And then on the other hand, I hear you say that and so we have to be a libertarian here. we've got to get the government out of all this business, and so we can take risks and fulfill our destiny. And then almost in the same breath you say, but since we're in competition with these other societies that don't value human life, the only way that we can compete with them is to become them.
So actually, I'm happy I stirred your brain up a little bit here, Buck.
Oh, my brain's very stirred now.
I'm happy I stirred it up a bit. So the takeaway message is, just in the national dialogue that's occurring, I mean, all these complexities are out there. And I think there needs to be a frank discussion about some of the issues that happen, and one of them is that. And just to state it, for my purposes, is enough. So just to state, this is what the issue is, this is what the problem is, and and that's where I would take it for now. But just understanding that, and then what the total solution is, may be some kind of new world order. So that's the way. I mean, I sort of put the issues there, and then I expanded a little bit.
Well, having posed the issue, I think we've done some good job of analysis tonight, but I don't think in our final few seconds we can now solve all these problems.
Well, actually, possibly our purpose is to stimulate inquiry.
Yes.
I hope we've stimulated some for out there in
One
TV
hopes.
land.
One hopes. So
I know there might be someone that thinks about this. Well, Buck, it's been great talking to you,
Indeed.
and I wish you well
Thank
in
you, sir.
your political ambitions.
I will announce it here.
All right, okay,
Right.
whatever. Okay, let's go.
Live long and prosper.
All right, great to talk to you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.